Good morning, everybody. I'm Richard Brent, the Editor-in-Chief of Briefing, the monthly magazine for smarter legal business management. And today I am delighted to be continuing our Briefing 5P event for 2020, which is an occasion that we've been running for 6 years now. And as always, it focuses on new initiatives and continuing joined-up efforts to make the most of several strategic levers that law firms can pull: process, pricing, projects, and of course their people, all designed to help firms to achieve the right level of our 5th P, which is profit from their services. This year we've been running a special webinar every month, one dedicated to each of the Ps, in the run-up to the main event, which will be coming your way in November. Today we turn our attention to driving overall performance at law firms in clearly continuing highly challenging times. That's performance within different teams, in terms of the additional boost offered by effective collaboration across the firm, and particularly when it comes to finding the right solutions to client needs. I'd also like to say, before we kick off, a very big thank you to our partner for the session this morning, which is Intapp, who I'm sure probably needs no introduction, but they support law firms to improve performance in many different respects with a wide range of technology solutions, including surrounding intake, conflicts, pricing, experience, pitching, and of course client relationships. All very much prime 5P, Briefing 5P territory. And later on we'll be joined by Gareth Thomas, who's the practice group lead for the Intapp marketing and BD practice for Europe, Middle East and Asia. A few points of basic housekeeping before we get started. We've dedicated a fair amount of time at the end of the session this morning for your own questions to the participants who will be speaking in a while. Please submit questions or thoughts in the chat here at any time, and I'll keep an eye on them and relay them, mostly in that final closing section. Briefing 5P has always stood out, I hope, as a very interactive event with a good atmosphere in that respect, and we're trying to keep as much of that in this virtual format as possible. So please do make your thoughts and questions known. The event is being recorded this morning and for publication later on our website, and you can find Briefing both on Twitter at Briefing Legal and of course online at briefing.co.uk. We are going to start with some really quite concise 10-minute mini presentations from my guests this morning on the overall theme. And first up, I'm delighted to welcome Daryl Atkinson, who is the Business Development and Marketing Director at Howard Kennedy. He's a very experienced professional services marketeer with many years at many different organisations. And at Howard Kennedy, he's responsible for brand building, reputation management, and client relationship initiatives. Hi, Daryl.
Morning, and welcome everybody from sunny London Bridge. As you can see, I am in the office, so we're starting our slow return to the office. We get a whole bunch of people in every day who need to be here for either to work collaboratively or for people who are struggling to work at home. So it's a slow start, but we have started. I wanted just to talk a little bit about our journey over the last 6 months. So both from the firm's point of view, from Howard Kennedy's point of view, and from my own as leader of the BD team here, in developing our response to what was initially, I think, very much a health crisis, but now seems to be much more of an economic and social crisis about how do we deal with this looking forward. We spent a lot of our time early on simply responding to the new situation, scrubbing around to make sure everyone can work remotely effectively, which seems to have happened very easily. And literally everything that we used to do in a physical sense is now done virtually. What has been interesting to see as well is that productivity, both amongst the legal teams and in terms of what we're creating from the BD team, seems to have held up and is in fact improving. We're seeing really good, strong time recording from lawyers so they seem to be very able to be productive at home, which has been really interesting to see, and of course gives us a lot of food for thought about what we do in the future. From a BD point of view as well, what the crisis did what did happen is that people are creating an awful lot more content. There's an awful lot more to say, and I think people being at home, not having the commitments to travel and so on in the morning, had more time to develop to creating content in order to inform their clients and contexts. We use a blogging tool as a way of enabling lawyers to create content quickly and easily and relating to the news stories of the day. And we found that over the last 6 months, compared to the previous year, the level of posts that have been made, something like 90% increase in those, which is really quite something. We've also, in terms of business, we are seeing different areas of the business doing better than others. Largely the more transactional sides seem to be a little bit subdued, but there is an uptick in work sadly in dispute resolution and in private client work in particular, whereas people start to think about arranging their own affairs as the crisis has continued. And we've had to respond to that too, in thinking about where do we invest, where do we, from both a BD and a staffing point of view, in order to meet that challenge and to meet that, in fact, an opportunity for us. The client response has been really interesting. We surveyed our clients fairly early on to understand what they felt about the way that their matters were being progressed, about the way that they were interacting with their lawyers, without being able to visit the offices in person. And that was really interesting and insightful too, in that most of our clients are quite happy with dealing with us in a more virtual way, much more to our surprise than the lawyers that they were talking to. We did a similar survey with our lawyers, and the lawyers were much more concerned about visits to the office from our clients than they actually were. And that gives us a lot of food for thought about what do we do about this going forward. And we are now thinking more proactively, looking forward over the next 3 to 6 months about what we might do differently in the longer term. Clearly, our clients don't need us necessarily to behave in the same way as we've done before. The move to remote working has driven a lot of innovation around technology, and there is some really quite complex kit that we now have in place to enable online mediations and hearings, with the need for virtual side rooms and connections to courtrooms, which is we've been thinking about this for a long time. But actually, this crisis has really enabled that innovation to happen in a really short space of time. It does, of course, put pressure on us in terms of how do we support that. The people who are taking part in these hearings and court meetings tend to be the more senior folk. Being more senior often means being a bit older and maybe a little bit less tech savvy. And therefore, the level of support that we need to provide has increased to make sure that the events like this can happen easily and smoothly. Other technology that we've seen come into play very quickly, so the virtual signing of documents, witnessing and signing of wills, all have been enabled by the legal profession now in allowing this technology to take place, long overdue. And the move to more remote working continues, I think, with investment in things like phones being connected to your laptops. So really severing that link between you and your desktop, which is really interesting. Our focus from a BD perspective over this time has been to think about content, the delivery, a multi-channel approach to the delivery of content. We can't talk to people in the way that we used to in organising events, seminars, roundtables, and training, so everything has had to move online. There is a lot of content out there, and we're very aware that we have to make this content really good in order to cut through. And thinking about our audiences in trying to personalize that content to some extent. And so creating online hubs around particular themes for particular audiences. So really getting quite complicated in the way that we do this, and perhaps a much more B2C approach than has been before. This is all provided, while this is all a crisis and is a bit of a worry, obviously, it is also an opportunity for us too. Because what we found in developing content and in developing online events like this one is that there's no constraint on numbers. There's no constraint on catering, support staff, the size of rooms. That's all gone. So we can promote these things much more widely online. And what we're finding is that we're delivering really large audiences suddenly that we couldn't have achieved before. And a lot of these people were people that we didn't know previously. So again, we're finding that we're able to reach audiences that we haven't been able to before. This does have a challenge, obviously. So where we're delivering inbound inquiries, inbound leads, as it were, with new people attending our content, is working out, well, who does that person belong to? There isn't a physical relationship with that person. So how do we work out how to move that relationship on from a fairly tenuous online relationship into something more meaningful? And there's a lot of work then around CRM and following up on the various contacts that we're making through this new way of delivering content. So that's my little story. It's all been exciting to some extent, worrying to a big extent, but we do think there is real opportunity for the future.
Thank you very much, Daryl. Already got some questions coming to me based on that, but we're going to welcome you back a bit later on for a bit of a chat. And next, we are going to hear from the client side of the relationship that you just described in quite some detail, who is Rachel Roberts, who's the Head of Legal, Commercial and Compliance at Fujitsu UK&I Ireland. She leads a team of 80 lawyers, commercial managers and other regulatory professionals covering compliance, data privacy and company secretarial responsibilities. She's built and restructured teams across disciplines, enhancing processes and developing technology and data solutions herself. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Richard. That's great. So I would like to start a little bit differently, if this is possible. So if you can identify your chat facility and just give me a rating 1 to 10 of how you're feeling. So I'm going to start with how I'm feeling. If everyone can just let me know, please don't be shy. I can't see your faces. I'd just like to know generally with everybody that's attending today, or just a feel, can anybody identify or tell me from a score for 1 to 10 how they're feeling? 8. Thanks, Daryl. 8.5. Wow, Gareth, that's fantastic. 7s. Okay, so we're all feeling pretty positive. The reason of doing this is that this is 7s. Okay, they keep coming through. I'm pleased about this. We're at the top end. If we get some 2 or 3s, I know I'm on. I know I'm not doing well. So one of the challenges that we find and that we've been finding during the whole pandemic is how do we virtually engage on these types of calls? So how do I read the room? How do I make an impact? And how do I understand, you know, some of those soft skills that you would get in a face-to-face environment when I'm effectively talking to my camera and I can't see your faces? And I think that's one of the challenges that we found is really how do we engage our technology and how do we be slightly brave and risk-taking to create an informal environment where there's a two-way conversation. So I'm pleased to see that many of you have replied with the chat. I know you're in the room. Hopefully now you're actively listening, which means that I've got some of your attention, which is critical to kind of when you're doing these virtual meetings. So I just wanted to just give a few minutes on what we found, and I don't think my experience is going to be particularly different from many others, but we've definitely found that COVID has almost been like a flash of lightning is how I describe it, sort of illuminating a landscape, and really has helped us to see some elements of our environment that was sort of slowly coming to pass, whether that be in how we engage in our family life and communities, the economy, certain industries, or even climate change. And what that's done for us is really accelerated maybe what we would have seen in 20 years happening now. So workplaces obviously engaging technology differently, being forced to make and enable home working, which in many situations seemed impossible. You know, we've got clients in the financial services sector where that seemed impossible from a regulatory perspective, but you know, that has been made possible. And from to the sort of the retail sector, where we all know the way in which we engage as consumers has been coming for a long time, but really the pandemic has really sped that up. And the added combination of Brexit, which I think is not being talked about enough at the moment, is a really sort of dramatic moment in time and a shift in the way we live and work, and also placing quite significant pressure on different industries. So if we just think about yesterday, the EU saying that they were delaying their decision on allowing clearinghouses in London to continue to clear euro transactions. I mean, that's a significant impact on the financial services industry. So from our perspective as an IT services provider, we're seeing an impact on the retail and hospitality sector, the manufacturing sector, the financial services sector. And as the pandemic continues and we have the added complications of Brexit, there really is more pressure on our business, particularly to hit our sales numbers. And IT budgets for our customers are either dramatically reduced or almost on hold. So what we're seeing is that customers are extending existing contracts. So where we have deep relationships, we are seeing that they're extending contracts that may have naturally come to an end. Instead of risking investments in sort of new technology or new providers, where they would feel at this point in time where the landscape is slightly unsettled, they don't want to take on those sort of risks and challenges. So really importantly, what we're seeing is a need for us to deepen our existing customer relationships, and an expectation from us as a legal and commercial team to contribute to that sales challenge. So we are being brought into that conversation much more from a business perspective to say, Rachel, can your team connect with the in-house team at this company that we are, you know, trying to deepen our relationship with? Have a conversation which has nothing to do with the contract that we have with them. Talk to them about how we're engaging technology for our workforce. Many different subject areas that aren't necessarily linked directly to what we do now for them. And there's an expectation on us in our support function to get much more at the forefront to help our business to confront that challenge. What that does mean for us in terms of our spend for external firms and external counsel is that, yes, there's more pressure on that. There's more pressure on our function to become more efficient and to do more with less. And from our external providers, it means we need to get value and justify that spend. And I think from our perspective, where we see that we get real value, again, is where we have a deep relationship, where it's informal, where it's already existing, and we can have a kind of a speedy exchange, which is very dynamic, which is bouncing ideas around, which is very much involved in helping us solve our business challenge, as opposed to legal and commercial issue that we are discussing. So I think that was something that was happening already, but it is something that is now going to continue to get more pressure, so becoming more efficient. And then, like most teams that we've shifted our working pattern, it's that challenge of creating a productive workforce. So I think the extension of the day has been a challenge for many people. We tend to be in front of our screen earlier, finishing later. We don't have those natural breaks in the day which help us. And so while we've seen productivity be very static and in fact rise in some cases, what we've noticed is that initial energy during the pandemic is starting to slightly taper off, and people are getting tired. They're trying to see, actually, how do I make this more sustainable? We're thinking about how we can give people in the meeting title, for example, to say there's no content that's going to be delivered, so they can walk around while they're on a call, get away from their screen, and really trying to think about what can we do to make this a more sustainable, normal way of working. And that was it really as an introduction, Richard. So I'm happily take questions and discuss further anything you'd like me to talk about.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rachel. And of course, you're going to stay with us, and I'm going to welcome back Daryl and also introduce again Gareth. As I mentioned, Gareth was the practice group lead for the Intapp marketing and BD practice. And prior to that, he worked at One Place, I Manage, Raven, and also Ticket. And Gareth, we've heard quite a lot of different challenges there. I just wondered if, before we sort of unpack that a bit more, whether you could tell us what you're seeing in the market in terms of the challenges that your law firm clients are grappling with at the moment.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the introduction, Richard. So, yeah, I'd say from our perspective, talking to our legal clients, because we tend to deal with legal clients as opposed to corporate legal, which is obviously Rachel's background, is really one around data being probably the biggest challenge. And there's sort of different levels or ends of the spectrum as to what law firms' data challenges are. So we're talking to clients at the moment who have really understood through the challenges of the pandemic that they don't necessarily know their clients as well as they should do, that they don't actually know who they know particularly well within those clients and who they don't. We've had lots of discussions with firms who found it a challenge to understand who they're not staying in touch with. So if you take your sort of key client program that all firms would run to varying levels of success, then we had a lot of firms early on in the pandemic that we work with asking us to help them configure certain parts of the system in order to identify who out of their key clients have they not been in touch with since the start of the pandemic. So, it's all very well staying in touch with people, but, you also need to know who you're not staying in touch with. So that's probably at the one end of the spectrum. And then I'd say at the other end, in terms of data, it tends to be around firms looking to introduce more and more of their data silos into some sort of central dashboard or one place to go to view the information. So as they start to understand all the different challenges that the pandemic's brought to them, they realize that bringing all these different silos into one location is probably more valuable now than it's ever been before.
Thank you very much. So I wanted to first pick up on something you said near the beginning of your introduction there, Daryl, which is that you've had to think quite carefully about where you invest, given the changing. And I wanted to think about that particularly in the sort of context of technology. Have you had to? We've actually done some research which hasn't been produced yet. We found that firms have said that they are investing more in technology overall because of the pandemic. But I just wondered to what extent you've had to sort of reprioritize things as you've.
Yeah, well, there's the from a business opportunity point of view, clearly that shifted over the last 6 months. Whereas Howard Kennedy has a reputation, for example, in real estate, and real estate has been one of those areas that has been particularly hard hit over the last few months, and will continue to be so. But at the same time, other lines of business are opening up. So there seems to be a lot more dispute type work, a variety of disputes, like Rachel describing the contract negotiations and so on, which need to be supported. So we are trying to, in terms of my own BD effort, think about that as to where is the opportunity for the firm, and to redeploy to some extent the investment we're making in supporting and promoting different bits of the firm. The way that manifests itself, so the investment we're making around creating this idea about content, how do we, I'd be interested to know in Rachel's experience into what people have been delivering, but to try and create interesting, engaging, timely and relevant content that really cuts through is where we're really trying to shift our investment to at the moment, because there is so much out there. And we know that in the same way as we are getting, we're beginning to meet new people virtually, we know that our clients are also consuming the content of our competitors. So there's a real content war to be won here. In thinking about what's relevant and what can we get out there, and that's the investment that needs to go with that to make hay.
And we'll come to Rachel. Before we do though, just on that content point as well, about, more personalisation, content war to be one. So that probably requires some sort of prioritization of what people are doing as well, does it? Have you had to think about sort of roles and responsibilities for a team as well?
Within the team, yeah. So a big part of most professional firms' marketing and BD effort would be in getting people together to deliver content at conferences, at seminars, and there's a big support function behind that in order to enable these. So we've had to redeploy people that were once upon a time organising physical events into the delivery of more virtual events. And actually the process is much the same. There's a lot of the pre-planning that goes on, the organising speakers, the invitations, all are broadly the same as they are for physical events. So it's been relatively easy to redeploy those folk moving from the physical environment to the virtual environment.
Thank you. And Rachel, feel free to comment on what Daryl was saying about the quality of sort of the content that law firms generally are producing and the relevance of it, but also sort of the same question to you about the prioritization of all of these projects.
Yeah, so just on Daryl's comment, so the content that I found the most useful is that which is trying to give insight as to how the current landscape will develop. So, a political view, an economic view, an industry-led view, sort of beyond the legal, the legal view, actually helping us to think about what are the different ways that this could play out and what are the potential impacts, and trying to help give insight. And I found those the most interesting, and also the ones that are happening quickly. So I think it's sort of, when you talk about a race, that's very relevant, because I think sometimes we can over-engineer and then sort of miss the boat in terms of presenting content. And I think many, well, particularly from my perspective, I'm okay with a more informal, bouncing ideas type of session if it's done in sort of real time and early. So I think the content or the sessions that I found really useful are ones where, there's real depth of insight and knowledge and perspective. Those sessions are really useful to me. And then the ones where they are, quickly highlighting to me something that I wasn't aware of or that hasn't yet come to pass, whether it's a political situation or a particular industry being effective or what's in the news, and really keeping current. I think the challenge for many firms though is if you haven't got a existing relationship with a depth of understanding of that business, because I think the content that naturally draws me in is one where I've got a relationship which is very open, very transparent, and they know our business, and therefore they can create, they not only are horizon scanning, they're also then saying, for you this means X, and therefore you could approach it in XYZ ways, and so not only looking outwards but then applying it for me and helping me to speed up that process, ultimately because they understand what I need to deliver to my stakeholders. So almost, that much more sort of in the trenches, part of the team, really understanding what I need to then, be able to make that onward kind of engagement with my stakeholders. And then, Richard, in terms of sort of where we're prioritizing, that's a really interesting question, because I think we have a challenge in that we need to pivot our resources to where we expect our revenue to go. And so we are looking at, industries and customers where we think there will be, that investment of time will come to bear. So really trying to invest in the right space for us over the next 12 months, and pivoting our resources quickly to that. And then I think from an internal L&C team, what we're doing is really continuing on what we've been doing from a data analytics perspective, so making sure we can capture information in real time, thinking about how we present that, so sort of interactive dashboards. I mean, fantastic. From a global perspective, they are really, really useful to us. We're just on that journey at the moment. And then thinking about predictive risk. So for the particular industry I'm in, unfortunately, our contracts do sometimes go wrong, and really thinking about where are those challenges and how can we understand what they are before they happen. And so what I'm seeing is, for us, not potentially a complete shift in direction, but more of a continue on this journey and maybe speed up is what we're seeing.
And again, the same question I put to Daryl sort of is, has that required also any changes to how the team that you're managing work in terms of the roles that they're doing?
So I mean, so how they're working. So that's a really good question. I think the one, since the pandemic, the real focus on over communication has been key. So you can't rely anymore on the water cooler conversations, that sort of informal loop of information, and you have to be much more kind of definite about it. And so we've been really focused on over communicating. So my managers have been, you know, team meeting after meeting after meeting, and again, trying to keep the team with you, I think, is really important. So we have been focused on that particularly. And what we are seeing is our operations team, they're really coming into their own in this environment. So having people with a legal background or a multifaceted background, so people that can engage technology, they know what we need, they are much more kind of literate that way than I am. They are really helping me to be able to make the most of the technology, and also take some risks and have a bit of fun with it. So I think we are in this new environment, and we need to just change the way we do things and not overthink it. We need to take a few risks. If it goes wrong, not be scared about that. Hence my 1 to 10 this morning. It's very interesting. You're sort of changing the way you are engaging with a group just to see if you can change the energy slightly and try something new.
Gareth, is Intapp looking at facilitating some of these changes at the moment? That sort of what you're talking about, sort of the style of communication. This point about the content needing to be even more timely than it has needed to be in the past.
Yeah, I think, I mean, our role in this, Richard, is really about enabling the firms that want to do things differently to be able to do that. So the technology is able to allow firms to be much more collaborative, firms to understand, based out of content that we've been issuing and thought leadership we've been issuing in the past, what's been particularly successful, what hasn't. We can take things like data sources from external data providers as well as internal, bring it all together, and then allow firms to get insights that they weren't able to get before, to understand who they should probably be targeting based upon work they've delivered historically, or any potential pitches that they've gone for historically that haven't gone particularly well due to various factors, to help them better understand how to repitch to similar organisations in the future. But I think we don't get to get too close to the actual strategy internally within the firm. We tend to be much more around helping them align the technology to the strategy. So,
as I said earlier, I'd probably bring in most of the questions from the audience toward the end, but I think this one sort of follows on quite nicely from what we've just been talking about, which is...
You've just gone on to mute, Richard, at exactly the wrong moment.
Somebody else.
Yeah, no, I do that as well.
I didn't want to hear that question. What data will be most important to MBD leaders, Daryl and
yeah.
Rachel, in the next 12 months of uncertainties is the question.
Well, from my point of view, what's been really interesting is that because everything is virtual now, because everything is digital, that means it's recorded, and it means I've got much more data about what people are doing, what people are up to, who they're talking to, who they haven't talked to. And that data will really be able to drive our BD and client service strategy over the next year, because we've suddenly got this real handle on what people are doing, because it's all digital, which is a real bonus for us. That's for me.
Okay, thank you. And Rachel?
So again, interesting question, because we've been looking at our external firms and how we use them for over the last 12 months. And, you know, globally, we have hundreds of firms and we have a panel like most in-house teams. But the shift that we've seen is much less of our spend going to our panel firms. And I think it will be interesting to see how that continues or changes over the next 12 months. And therefore, what comes to the fore. I think my instinct would be that it's that personal connection which becomes key. And the challenge that we have to demonstrate value means that we need partners and firms who are really willing to share the responsibility for our stakeholders and find innovative ways of doing that. So I think really seeing how we use our firms and our external suppliers over the next 12 months is going to be really interesting. Also interesting to see where that spend goes and really to see, you know, what's the activity that's involved in that. You know, is it less of now sort of an overflow and more of an insightful engagement? I don't know, but I think that's going to be really interesting for us over the next 12 months.
You mentioned those dashboards, for example. What are the metrics that you would want sort of front and center? And those
that is a very good question. I mean, it would be lovely to see rolling weekly spend. It would be lovely to see sort of customer satisfaction scores. So I like to know, you know, for us to sort of think about how we rate our firms, to think about where we engage them, so which disciplines, and if it's a consistent individual that we use, and really getting that understanding of, instead of it being being data driven. So really seeing, while we talk that we think that we behave in this way, does the data support that or not? And I think there is going to be a pressure to have more of a real-time engagement on spend. And I think sometimes we find that the delay in that, or the sort of the slow way in which spend is reported, challenging, because I'll get asked by a stakeholder, we've budgeted this, where are we? And I'll go, hang on, I just need to send an email. Or let me just look back last month, what we spent, what I'm thinking we're going to spend. And so I think there's much more that needs to be done there to be able to enable the in-house team to say, I know where I am. You know, my external counsel, when we start with a particular matter, they're in the trenches. They say to me, what is your budget for this matter? You know, what is the delivery expectation of your stakeholders? They really understand, you know, what it is that I'm doing. So dashboards that can sort of capture our behavior in some way, which helps inform, you know, how we use them going forward, and then what we need.
Okay. Thank you. Daryl, another big theme that's come up throughout the discussion so far is, of course, value. I don't know if anyone's used the phrase more for less, but that's the sort of feeling that we're getting, which of course is what we were talking about during the last last recession, the financial crisis, how firms had to respond to their clients' changing needs. Do you have to go even further on that agenda now, do you think? What are you doing to
value
to clients?
Yeah, the difficult one, there's nothing that springs to mind that we're doing differently to what we were doing before. There is obviously pressure all the time on costs. The one thing that I think that we've seen clients do like, and the value add that we do get feedback on, is around availability and responsiveness. Those are the things that that they're continually being referenced by clients. And I think and one of the complaints I get from the lawyers is the expectation about being available. So it works both ways. We see it as a virtue, something that we are good at, and we seek to encourage with our clients, being available. And yet it does have a personal cost in that clients recognizing that make full use of it as well.
Rachel, what are the sort of behaviours maybe over the last period? We talked about providing you with the data that you want, and what are the sort of behaviours that have most impressed you and how firms have responded?
That is a good question. I think the firms that have really impressed us are those that have real relevant content. You know, you spend an hour and it's a worthwhile, use of time. You come off there and you've learned something, you feel like you've got more insight. That's been really impressive. I think the firms that know our business, are in daily contact, see a gap in what we're doing, and then invest in us. So, I've had one firm that's seen that we need support in a certain area, and instead of continuing to they can take the benefit of that because it increases our spend with them. They've said, look, we're going to invest 2 days training your team so that you can do more yourselves. I mean, fantastic. I mean, that is just, it feels that is a two-way relationship. We're in a team. And other firms are those that, as I said, horizon scan and know our business, know the contracts that we have, and they look to not only tell us what's going on and help inform us, but then make it relevant for us. So whether that would be a suggestion on, change this clause in your template, you'd probably want to provide this update to your business, you might want to provide this training to your team, and actually we can do it for you. It's that where you feel like it's an extended team engagement that's really impressed me. And then there have been firms that have been almost totally absent. And I think if BD isn't in the traditional sense of what BD has been for law firms, it's almost been forgotten. It's sort of dropped off a to-do list. And I think if you look at BD as a role which you can outsource to somebody in a team, or, if you haven't got a personal responsibility to understand that that's part of the job as the partner or the associate or whoever it is, I think that's a real problem. And I think it's dropped off people's to-do list. They're thinking we're not having to do events or, attend a client meeting in person, and therefore it's been completely absent. So I think there's been some firms that have adapted brilliantly, and I think there's some firms that are really not yet at the party.
I've got a question there for you, Rachel, on that, if that's okay, Richard. So there's obviously a certain type of enthusiasm and engagement within the firms that have impressed you versus those that haven't. So will you consciously then look over time to do less with the firms that have been less engaged, or if they're experts in a particular area where there's a particular niche that you always go to firm X for that? I'm just sort of trying to understand how do you think it will.
So that's a really good question, because I think that instinctively, yes, I think the firms that haven't engaged us in this time, I think that will be a knock-on effect to the relationship. I think when the firm has, real expertise, there's always going to be firms that you go to for that specialism that you cannot have internally, that you need from a firm, and that you trust a firm to give you that. And where that trust is being created, I think that work will always flow. I think it's more of from my perspective, more of the general, we are a heavy sort of commercial firm. I mean, a commercial in-house team, so most of it's business facing work. And so it's the firms that are, trying to tap into, that commercial work, or we have our own internal employment council, the employment work. So where we have capacity ourselves, and quite often it is more of a bouncing ideas, insight, sometimes overflow, I'm going to be more invested in the firms that have demonstrated they're invested in my relationship during the lockdown. I do think there will always be a need for the real niche specialisms, and there will always be workflow there.
Thank you.
Okay, we are now officially in audience question time. I've got plenty more lines of inquiry, but if you do want to make any questions known, please do so. We've got one that's come in. Are there any views on whether the move towards even more remote working, as some firms have indicated, is in their futures, will have an impact on MBD recruitment? That's probably one for you, e.g. location, ability to work remotely, the skill set that you need to work remotely as opposed to in the office, perhaps?
Well, that's interesting. So the shift to more remote working, and the likely this is going to continue for some time. I think already I'm seeing within the team some views about do I have to be in the office at all, and we need to think about whether we can fulfill certain functions. Not hardly being at the office. I'm sure that they'll be in from time to time, but and to some extent, I'm comfortable with that. And so if we were to be recruiting for BD people who were performing certain roles that didn't necessarily need to be in the office, then why can't they sit in Scotland or Somerset? There's no reason. So it hasn't happened yet, but I can foresee that, and I'm open to it actually. For many of the roles, they don't necessarily need to be here in London in expensive real estate, and while the team ethos and collaborative working is really important, if it gives people the choice of more lifestyle choices, then that may compensate. So we'll see. It hasn't happened yet, but we'll see.
And in terms of those sort of the skill sets that would be required for remote working, you think that that's, in terms of for the BD role anyway, for the people in your team, there's no real difference in whether you're working remotely or more in the office?
We don't have client-facing BD people, so it isn't a more internal function. So to some extent, the way that we're working remotely matches the way that we'll be working if we're all in the office anyway, albeit that we don't have the same sort of quality of meetings. You can't achieve the same on a Zoom call, I don't think. So not really.
Rachel, what about in terms of your team? Not necessarily MBD, but
Yeah.
the large team yourself.
I think it's opened up the landscape much more for having employees recruited from all over.
Mm-hmm.
I think the access to the office, from my perspective, I think the COVID is kind of a sharp, severe situation. I think that will subside. But I think that the working practices that have sort of come to bear off the back of it will continue. So I think that from my perspective, I am keen that we have a team day in the office, so we get much smarter about time that we use for team space and for team conversations, as opposed to those other days where we can service our inboxes. So really thinking about what elements of our job need to be in an office and what elements of our job don't need to be in the office. We were trying to get back to one day a week, a team day, where we are much more focused on, not having meetings in the diary, but much more kind of open space and conversation with the people that are around us. Now, given some of the changes this week, that's becoming more challenging, but I do think in terms of employees that we recruit, we're going to become much less worried about if they can be in the office 3, 4, 5 days, a minimum, one a week, one every 2 weeks. I think that's fine. I think it's important to establish some face-to-face relationships, particularly at the beginning of a role. But I think onboarding will shift in how we do that as well. So I think the landscape's sort of open and ready to sort of welcome a different way of working.
I have to ask Daryl's earlier observation, which I'm going to paraphrase. Apologies, Daryl. That sort of clients have proved more sort of comfortable with this virtual way of working than what they might have done. What's your take on that? Is that the case for you?
For me, definitely. So I'm okay. So I do like to be on video. I do like to see expression. I think it helps with the conversation. But I also understand that, not everyone likes to be on video, and it doesn't also work for people. But I think the virtual working and the virtual interaction with our firms, I'm completely comfortable with. It hasn't changed anything from my perspective, other than giving me some time back in my day from traveling. So I've welcomed it. I do think the challenges with the continued lack of team space and time is something that we do need to address. I think you can see that certain ideas, projects, initiatives, they do stall a bit when you don't have face-to-face time. So that's something that importantly we'll need to we need to kind of think about how we do that going forward, and make sure that we allow ourselves the time and space to do that.
Yeah, and I think maybe there's a long-term thing to think about here as well, in that whilst it's been really good at the moment, everyone's gone away and existing teams are comfortably collaborating and working at a distance. But if you think about a typical law firm, their churn, their employee churn is something like 20%. It doesn't take long, it will not take long before you've got dispersed, devolved teams who don't know each other very well. So it may be a different conversation that we have in a year's time, where it's great now, but will it be the same then? I'm not sure.
That's a good point.
A couple more questions from the people watching in, thank you. Which sectors or work types will be most attractive, if you know already, in the next 12 to 24 months? Sort of what are you seeing on the horizon there?
Yeah. From our firm's point of view, we're seeing a lot more opportunity around dispute resolution generally, and the private wealth, private client space. They've been really motoring, where the transactional areas are just less busy.
Gareth, I wondered if I could bring you in on this sort of observation about sort of potentially negative impact on relationships going forwards. You know, if we keep working in a more virtual way without any of that face-to-face interaction, is that a problem that technology can fundamentally help with, or is that just something that?
Yeah, good. So the technology can help with it in the sense that you can talk and see each other, and you can do a lot more now in a virtual environment than you could a couple of years ago. So the ability to have breakout rooms. I can share a document just with you, Richard, and then Rachel can share one with Daryl, and then we can, with online collaboration around contracts now with Office 365. Yes. So there are all sorts of ways of actually being able to do a lot more remotely now than you could. But I was chatting to a COO of one of our clients recently who said that they had a real problem early on in lockdown, and they're a city-based firm, because a lot of their younger workforce, whether they were associates, members of the support team, secretary, whatever they were doing, just not having the environment to work at home. So people in-house shares, people in flats, people that can't then get out and go have the space to actually get away from the screen. They're sort of working literally in their room the entire time. And so I think that their view was very much to open up access to the office for those that wanted to. And they were quite surprised that a lot of the younger workforce wanted to come in as quickly as they could, probably because of a lot of these actual sort of working condition reasons. But from my own personal view, we've now, since lockdown started, we've started to engage with new prospects, sign them as clients, and started projects, having done everything remotely, which is, part of the new world. But having been someone that's been sort of in software sales for over 20 years, I quite like going and meeting people. So I've personally found it a lot more difficult than I thought I would. But yeah, I think I think there will always be certain types of conversations that are best had face-to-face, particularly commercial ones. So I think that there will always be the need for certain elements of legal transactions to be done face-to-face if possible. But yeah, I think that inevitably there'll be certain types of work that are delivered remotely completely from now on. And I think a lot of what we used to do face-to-face, we don't need to do face-to-face anymore.
We're in the closing moments now. So if anyone else still has a burning question that can be answered in about a minute, please do let me know. Otherwise, I was going to wrap up by asking you, when it comes to actually the management of your individual teams, have you got any sort of takeaway, all three of you actually, any sort of takeaway lessons for how you have managed to manage people more effectively, and the performance, I suppose, going back to the key that we're talking about, more effectively through the lockdown period? In the one or two from each of you.
So I think from my perspective, the interesting thing we found from our employee surveys results that we had an increase during lockdown on communication, respectful treatment, and their role being meaningful. And it very interesting about engaging with the team, and that we became much better at sort of knowing the individual, because we made a point of saying, what is your working condition like? What are your challenges? How can we support you? Do you need some, flexible working? And then over communicating with our employees. And I think that's the bit for me that I've learned and want to continue to take forward, is that the individual is key, and actually everyone has different challenges and drivers, and what's working for one person is not for another. But actually to really engage your staff, really understanding those drivers is really key. And then the over communication. I mean, I thought that I was boring people with how much I was, communicating, and it seems to have come to bear very positively. So I think they're my takeaways.
Can't over communicate enough. Yes, certainly with your own team.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. That the Rachel's point about over communication, you simply can't communicate enough. What I've found useful is again, the management team here have done a great job of more corporate communication. So the internal messaging, which has really been really good. But to nuance that for the team, to explain what's been said so they get it in their terms, I think is really important. And to make contact with everyone within the team. So even people that I'm not the direct line manager, to call them individually and spend time with them, I think is really important. That real personal touch, and it's a commitment. It's a lot of time that you spend, but it does seem to retain that cohesiveness of the team.
Gareth, any?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, and obviously communication's critical. I mean, the team I'm in is a part of a global team, and trying to schedule things that aren't too much of a nightmare for more than probably one or two of you on each call is not an easy thing to do. But it's an art that we seem to be getting our heads around now. And I'd say just being respectful of how hard people are working, because there is this expectation now, well, people aren't going to be necessarily out for dinner. They're not going to be taking the kids swimming in the evening. So actually we could put a call in at 6 or at 7. And then what we noticed quite early on is amongst our own team that calls would start to creep later and later. And so we've had to have a few conversations where we've sort of pulled that back a step. But I'm pretty fortunate in the sense that Intapp do respect globally how hard people are working. And we have had a number of actual days off where they've closed the business other than sort of vital support functions a couple of times already in recognition to give people long weekends. And yeah, I think you definitely need to be wary of that sort of thing now.
So, I had seen a few businesses doing that. It's interesting. Okay, well, thank you very much. We are out of time. Thank you very much to Rachel Roberts, to Daryl Atkinson, and to, of course, Gareth Thomas of Intapp. And we have more 5P sessions coming your way soon. So thank you very much for joining us this morning.